What if the traits you get praised for at work and in life are the exact same traits that are quietly destroying you? The perfectionism, the hyper responsibility, the constant carrying of the weight of the world. We wear them like badges of honor. We treat them like personality quirks. But they aren't who you are. They are survival strategies. In our most recent videos, we've talked about how these exhausting patterns were learned in childhood and how healing requires moving beyond parental blame. But that leaves us with a glaring mystery. If our parents weren't sitting around trying to engineer an over-functioning, stressed out adult, why do you and so many of us have the exact same patterns? The answer requires us to look further back than we ever thought to go. When I first started doing this work, I focused almost entirely on my parents. That made sense. They were the people who raised me. They were the people I learned from. So naturally, I wanted to understand them. Why did they handle stress the way they did? Why they approached life the way they did? Why they seemed unable to rest? Why responsibility always seemed to come before everything else? And understanding them helped a lot. But eventually, I hit a wall because I kept finding myself asking the same question. Where did they learn that from? Because nobody wakes up one day and decides, you know what sounds fun? Carrying the weight of the entire world on your shoulders for the next 50 years. That pattern came from somewhere. So I started looking further back. And honestly, that's where things got interesting. When I started looking at my grandparents' lives, I began noticing something. The same patterns kept showing up. Different people, different personalities, different circumstances, but the same themes. Work harder, push through, don't complain, take care of everyone else first, keep going no matter what. And suddenly, my parents stopped looking like the beginning of the story and started looking like the middle. That realization hit me hard. Because for years, I had looked at some of my own behaviors and assumed that they were simply who I was. I thought,
I'm just someone who is responsible. I'm just someone who's driven, who's dependable. I'm just someone who gets things done.
Meanwhile, I was exhausted, stressed out, constantly carrying too much, unable to relax without feeling guilty, and always feeling like if I stopped pushing, everything would fall apart. Sound familiar? A big shift in my healing journey happened when I stopped viewing these behaviors as personality traits and started viewing them as strategies. Because a trait feels permanent, but a strategy feels optional. Because a strategy exists to solve a problem. And once I started looking at my family history, I realized that many of these strategies made perfect sense. My grandparents faced realities I never had to face: limited opportunities, instability, hardships. In those environments, being hyper responsible wasn't unhealthy, it was useful. Being willing to sacrifice wasn't unhealthy, it was necessary. Working constantly wasn't dysfunction, it was survival. The problem is that survival strategies often stick around long after the original threat disappears. The environment changes, but the strategy stays around. And eventually, somebody inherits a solution to a problem that no longer exists. This was one of the most important realizations in my own healing journey. Because for years, I thought my overfunctioning was simply my personality. I thought,
I'm just the reliable one. I'm just the responsible one. I'm just ambitious.
then I started seeing the exact same tendencies in my parents. And then I started seeing them in my grandparents. And suddenly I realized maybe this isn't who I am. Maybe this is what I inherited. And that was incredibly freeing. Because if something is inherited, it can be examined. And if it can be examined, it can be updated. And if it can be updated, I can choose whether I want to keep carrying it. That's a very different conversation than believing this is who I am. Something else happened when I started seeing these patterns across generations. I became more compassionate towards my parents. Not because everything was okay, not because mistakes stopped mattering, but because I could finally see that they were carrying things too. The same way I inherited patterns from them, they inherited patterns from someone else. And suddenly the story became bigger. Instead of asking, who do I blame? I started asking, what has been passed down here? That question opened doors that blame never could. So I have an exercise for you. I want you to get out a notebook, and on a page, I want you to create 3 columns. I want you to label these columns grandparents, parents, and you. 1 for each generation. Under the first 2 columns, I want you to answer the following. What challenges were they facing? What behaviors helped them survive? What seemed to be rewarded? What emotional habits were considered normal? Then look for the reoccurring themes. Not events, but the patterns. Now, in the last column, I want you to answer these following questions. Which of these patterns still serve me? Which of these patterns exhausting me? Which of these patterns belong in a world that no longer exists? Because healing isn't just understanding where your patterns come from. It's deciding whether they still deserve a place in your life. One of the most powerful things healing can give us is perspective. Because once you start seeing patterns instead of just people, something changes. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, what am I carrying? Because most of us didn't inherit flaws. We inherited adaptations, solutions, strategies, ways of surviving. And while some of those strategies are still useful, some of them are keeping us trapped in levels of stress, responsibility, and exhaustion we no longer need. Healing is understanding what was passed down and consciously deciding what you want to keep and move forward and what ends with you. Healing isn't just about understanding your past. It's about deciding what will shape your future. All right. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.